I am coming at this in ignorance. I am professed ignorance. I know some things. I have looked in and read some things, but I'm going to assume that I don't know a whole lot about this compared to you who have lived it. So I guess my first question is South Park's representation of Mormonism. Is that basically correct? I know you did a video or two where you talked about this in detail, and we don't need to get into that kind of detail, but in broad strokes, is that a good representation of the LDS Church and its beliefs?
In broad strokes, that is a more accurate representation specifically of how the Book of Mormon was translated. It's a more accurate representation than the church provided me my entire life.
Oh, wow.
And this is not uncommon. A lot of people were woken up by that, where, I mean, when I first watched it and you see Joseph Smith put his head into the hat and start talking about that, like, that was like, I saw that. I'm like, that's a total lie. That's completely made up. But then when you go and you actually research it, it's true. And I remember seeing an interview with Matt Stone and Trey Parker, where they were like, yeah, we wanted to depict it right. So we went and looked at the historical records to make sure we got it right. So for them, they thought that Mormons knew this. They didn't realize that they were uncovering the whitewashing. And so the church, since that came out and it became part of the discourse of, all the kids who watch South Park who are Mormons, asking questions about it, the church has become more open. They've actually shown pictures of the stone, and they've published a narrative that does include the hat.
That's what I call the Mormon hat trick.
Exactly.
That's pretty dumb. That, and it's funny how South Park has been such a cultural thing for you and me, because of course, the Out of the Closet episode they did where they, cartoonize the entire Xenu narrative. And that is not, the Xenu narrative is so misrepresented in the world at large because everybody thinks that's what all Scientologists believe. So it doesn't totally, again, this is a point of slight difference between, the Mormonism where, Mormons really do believe that this is how this all went down. But then again, maybe not, because you didn't know about the hat thing.
Well, yeah, I think the hat thing is different from Xenu in that I think there's a stronger parallel in Mormonism about that kind of deep doctrine.
Yeah.
And you'll see this in a lot of different groups where they have a milk before meat philosophy, where you don't introduce some of the more difficult and deep doctrine to people who are investigating or first exposed to it. And so and this happens both in Mormonism, it happens to investigators, so maybe adults who are just becoming exposed to the church, but it also happens to children who are raised in the church. And that centers around the temple and the ceremony in the temple, and there's kind of a melodrama or a play that's part of that ceremony that talks about how the world is created and how the first humans on earth interacted with God. And that story, that narrative, and the different ordinances that are part of that ceremony are held away, and they're specifically not discussed with new members, and they're not discussed with children. And the way you can tell that this is kind of a secret doctrine is you'll have there's a person by the name of New Name Noah who went in and secretly videotaped the temple ceremony and put it online, and you'll have youth who are active church-going members of the church who will post on the video, this is totally made up. This isn't part of Mormonism. And that's because they have not yet gone through the process of going to the temple, and it's been kept secret from them. So when I heard about Xenu, and I heard about that you had to reach a certain level before you were actually exposed to that theology in the Going Clear documentary, the parallels to that, it's a little bit different level. I think you probably have to do a little bit more in depth in Scientology to get to that deep doctrine. But it's the same sort of thing where you don't realize that is part of your religion until you've already committed to it. And
yes. That's
the buy-in that we have. Yeah.
No, thank you for that clarification. It really helps make it clearer in my head how those things are parallel. And it's true, nobody who goes into Scientology, you're not going to hear about Xenu for most people. They're not going to hear about that for years. They're going to be active Scientologists, and if they watch Out of the Closet, South Park, or they read Time magazine, or they hear about this stuff, or they watch my videos, They're like, well, that's not Scientology. Well, it's not the Scientology they know, but that doesn't mean it's not Scientology.
Exactly. Now,
Same
how do
with,
they do it in Scientology? Well, is the 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 temple itself in Mormonism is treated as this thing that is so sacred that you are not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to discuss it outside of the walls of the temple.
mm-hmm.
And it's done with a level of what I call kind of deep programming that make it so that even when I left the church, it was very uncomfortable for me to talk about it. And this is something where, as a man, you're given a secret name in the temple that you cannot even tell your wife. Now,
Wow, I
your
did not know
wife,
that.
yeah, your wife is given a secret name that you are told, because what has happened is that in the future,
Of
when
course.
you're resurrected, you call them forth from, to enter into the kingdom of heaven, and you have to know their name in order to do that. But there are parts where the compartmentalization of the doctrine is so strong and so deep that it, even when you leave the church, it takes a time to get out of. And I can't even talk with my family members about this, because as soon as I start bringing up anything having to do with the temple, they're just like, no, that's too sacred, I can't talk about it. So I don't know if there's
Wow.
that type of element with the higher or deeper doctrine of Scientology.
Well, let me tell you. Here's how it works in Scientology: is you are told by L. Ron Hubbard through a lecture that he gave, and through the materials of the Xenu narrative, it's made very clear that if people are exposed to this information before they are ready for it, they will get sick and they will die.
Wow.
Yeah. So you are under the impression that you are going to mentally, emotionally, and spiritually damage these people with a very serious threat of even death should they not be ready for this material, and then they're exposed to it. Now, when you get to that level, the people who haven't gotten to that level yet, well, they don't know anything about it. So there's a public level lecture that Hubbard gave where he says he broke his back, he broke his arm, he went through all these physical contortions. It's not, and he doesn't say it'll kill you, but he says that it's, confidential for a reason, right? And then when you get to the materials is where you find out, yeah, if you're not ready for this, you'll get sick and die. But the sort of the legend or the mystique within the Scientology world on this is no one can ever say anything about it. They talk about the gains that they got from doing the level, what's called OT3 is the Xenu narrative, and it's not just an exposure to that information. That's only the very beginning part of it. There's a whole other thing that goes on where you take that e-meter and you have to then exorcise all these, demons or body thetans off of you, right? That's where that whole thing starts. And that's the real hush-hush part that they don't want people knowing about. So, so once you get to that level and you watch something like South Park, you can justify the fact that everybody who watched South Park didn't die because of some other convolutions that you can sort of use Scientology to justify. But really, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
If it really just doesn't. I mean, they have to do like all kinds of cognitive dissonance to make Hubbard's words still make sense to themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Because everybody should be dead.
Yeah.